Welcome to your deep dive. Today we'll be exploring the Chinese translation of Alan Watts's The Wisdom of Insecurity.
Salute.
Yeah, exactly. And through that lens, uh, looking at his thoughts on the roots of modern anxiety.
Mm.
What do you think about the book's dedication to Dorothy?
Well, it certainly hints that, maybe there's a personal touch to this exploration of such a universal feeling.
Yeah, for sure. Almost like we're getting a glimpse into Watts's own journey. And, the book dives right into this powerful analogy
Yeah.
of life as music.
Mm-hmm.
But then he suggests that so many of us, we try to control the music. Like we're scared of that silence between the notes
Right.
instead of just experiencing the melody as it kind of comes.
Yeah, I think that resonates with a lot of people, that fear of the unknown, that fear of what happens when the music stops.
Right.
And Watts, with his background in Eastern philosophy, he challenges that need to grasp for control.
So is that what he's saying?
Mm-hmm.
That this need for control is actually feeding anxiety?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big part of it. He argues that a lot of our anxiety comes from clinging to this illusion of a separate self,
Okay.
which he links to the concept of ego in Eastern thought. Like, we create this idea of ourselves as separate from the world, but really we're all interconnected.
So like waves in an ocean.
Exactly. And that's where this Chinese translation really emphasizes oof, or the present moment.
Hmm.
Watts suggests that when we're stuck worrying about the past or the future, we lose sight of that connection, that we're part of this larger flow of existence, always changing, always in motion.
Okay, so it's about being present right here, right now.
Mm-hmm.
But how does that help with anxiety? Like I still have bills, I have to pay deadlines to meet. And, the future is still uncertain.
Oh, for sure. It's not about ignoring responsibilities or pretending everything is fine, but more about shifting our perspective.
Right.
Understanding that anxiety often stems from wanting to control things that we can't actually control. Like, if you think about it, when you're worried about the future, you're essentially holding on to a mental picture of how you think things should be.
Yeah.
But life rarely goes according to plan.
Yeah, that's definitely true for me. Like trying to force things to go a certain way only to end up frustrated. So what's the alternative? How do we let go of needing to control everything?
Well, Watts suggests that embracing insecurity, rather than fearing it, can actually be a path to greater peace.
Mm.
It's not about becoming passive or giving up on our goals,
Okay.
but more about accepting that uncertainty is a fundamental part of life.
That sounds a bit counterintuitive. How can feeling insecure lead to peace?
Well, it's about recognizing that life is a process, a constant flow of change. Just like a piece of music has its highs and lows, moments of tension and release, life does too.
Hmm.
And if you try to force only the high notes, it's like creating dissonance, and that leads to more anxiety.
It's like trying to hold on to a sandcastle as the tide comes in.
Exactly. You can fight it, but eventually the waves are going to wash it away. That struggle, that resistance to the natural flow of things, that's what creates suffering. Watts encourages us to be more like surfers, learning to ride those waves of life even when they're a little choppy.
So instead of trying to control the music, we should learn to dance to whatever tune life throws at us.
Beautifully put. And that's where the wisdom of insecurity comes in. It's about finding that rhythm, that flow, even in the middle of uncertainty. The Chinese translation highlights this beautifully with its emphasis on hua. It invites us to consider how embracing this present moment with all its uncertainties might offer a different way of being in the world.
That sounds great in theory. But how do we actually apply this to daily life? Deadlines, tough decisions,
Yeah.
all the pressures of modern life. It's easy to say, go with the flow. But how do we actually do that when things feel chaotic?
Well, that's where mindfulness comes in.
Okay.
Watts emphasizes paying attention to our thoughts and emotions without judging them, cultivating this awareness of what's happening within us and around us.
So being present, but also observing how we react to things without getting swept away.
Exactly. It's about creating that space between our thoughts and our reactions so we can choose how we respond rather than simply reacting out of habit or fear. That's where the real freedom lies.
Like hitting the pause button before we react. Give ourselves a chance to choose a more skillful response.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we develop this mindfulness? Is it like meditation?
Meditation can help, but mindfulness is something we can cultivate in every moment. Paying attention to our breath, the sensations in our body, the sights and sounds around us, bringing our full attention to whatever we're doing, even something as simple as washing the dishes or walking the dog.
Finding those moments of presence throughout the day, even when we're busy.
Right. And the more we practice, the more natural it becomes. It's like training a muscle. The more we exercise our mindfulness muscle, the stronger it gets. And the easier it is to access that sense of presence, even in those challenging situations. This is starting to sound like a pretty powerful antidote to anxiety. But, life isn't always sunshine and roses. How can we embrace insecurity when things were actually tough, when we're facing challenges and setbacks?
Well, that's the true test, isn't it? And this is something that the Chinese translation emphasizes as well. The concept of hit isn't about pretending that everything is perfect.
Right.
It's about accepting the reality of our situation,
Yeah.
including the difficult emotions that might come up.
So acknowledging the pain, the fear, the uncertainty, without trying to push it away, doesn't that make it worse?
Watts argues that resistance is what makes things worse.
Mm.
When we try to fight against our feelings, we create more tension and suffering. It's like struggling against a current. You exhaust yourself but end up going nowhere. But when we allow ourselves to really feel our emotions without judgment, they can flow through us and eventually dissipate, like waves crashing on the shore. I see how it all ties together. Letting go of control, accepting the reality of, right now, learning to ride the waves of life even when they're rough.
Exactly. And that's where the wisdom of insecurity lies. It's not about looking for a life without challenges, but developing the resilience and inner strength to face them with grace and courage. Recognizing that even amidst uncertainty, there's beauty and wisdom to be found in simply being alive.
I love that. It's a reminder that life's a journey, not a destination, and that even in the middle of chaos, there's a deeper wisdom unfolding if we're open to it. What are your thoughts on that as the listener? What resonates most with you about these ideas?
That's a great question to ponder. And as you reflect on that, consider this. What possibilities might open up in your life if you embraced insecurity? Not as something to fear, but as a chance to grow, to learn to experience the fullness of this present moment.
We'll continue exploring these fascinating ideas in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
It makes you think about, even centuries ago, people grappled with these same anxieties about life, uncertainty, the passage of time.
Yeah.
Like in the book, he mentions St. Augustine,
Oh, yeah.
way back in the 4th century, who, famously pondered the nature of time, saying, "What then is time? If no one asks me, I know what it is. If I wish to explain it to him who asks, I do not know."
It's so true, though. Like, we all experience time, but when you try to define it, grasp it, control it,
Yeah.
that's where the anxiety comes in.
That's a
and
universal
struggle.
Yeah.
But here's what I find really interesting. Watts doesn't just focus on individual psychology.
Right.
He also critiques societal structures
Mm-hmm.
that fuel this anxiety, like the constant pressure to achieve, to be productive, to always want more.
Absolutely. And I think that resonates even stronger today than when Watts was writing in the mid-20th century.
Yeah.
The pace of life has just accelerated. Technologies everywhere. That pressure to be always on has intensified.
Yeah.
It's no wonder so many people feel overwhelmed and anxious.
So it's not just our own minds, but the world we live in that creates this anxiety.
Yeah.
But if that's true, how do we find peace in all the chaos? We can't just, opt out of society, can we?
That's the challenge, isn't it? Finding that balance between engaging with the world and keeping our inner peace.
Right.
Watts doesn't give us a simple solution, but he points us in a direction. Remember the title, The Wisdom of Insecurity? He suggests that we can see insecurity as a source of growth and creativity rather than being afraid of it.
Okay, but how can insecurity be wise? It's uncomfortable, unsettling.
Think about it this way. When we cling to certainty, to this idea of control, we're basically stuck in a rigid box, limited by our own fears and preconceptions.
Mm-hmm.
But when we embrace insecurity, when we step outside that box, we open ourselves up to new possibilities, new ways of seeing and being.
So loosening our grip, allowing ourselves to be surprised by life. But isn't that risky? What if we mess up or fail?
Of course, there's always a risk of making mistakes, but isn't that part of what makes life interesting? Think back to that music analogy. A perfectly composed symphony can be technically impressive,
Right.
but it can also feel predictable, lifeless. It's the improvisation, the unexpected notes, those moments when musicians go off script, that creates the magic, the energy, the real beauty.
So we're so scared of hitting a wrong note that we forget to enjoy the music, to get lost in the rhythm.
Right.
How do we actually do that? How do we go from being afraid of insecurity to embracing it?
It's a process.
Okay.
And it starts with awareness. Watts encourages us to be more mindful, to pay attention to our thoughts and emotions, to really see our patterns of reaction. And the Chinese translation highlights this too, inviting us to cultivate this deeper understanding of this present moment.
Yeah.
Not just as a concept, but as something we live.
So being more present, more aware of what's going on inside and outside of us.
Exactly. When we're truly present, we get less caught up in stories about the past or the future.
Okay.
We're less likely to be controlled by anxiety or fear.
Hmm.
We see things more clearly with more objectivity and compassion. And from that place of clarity and presence, we can start to make choices that are more aligned with what we value, with our deepest wishes, even if it means stepping into the unknown.
It sounds like a journey of self-discovery, learning to trust ourselves, and how life unfolds.
Yeah.
And that's where the true wisdom is, isn't it? Not avoiding uncertainty, but navigating it with grace and courage.
Beautifully said. And remember, this is ongoing, not a finish line. It's about showing up for ourselves and for life
Yeah.
with curiosity, an open heart, and a willingness to embrace what we don't know, trusting that even when things feel insecure, there's a deeper wisdom guiding us toward a more genuine and meaningful life.
It's interesting to think about how Watts doesn't just point to like our individual psychology.
Yeah,
He also looks at those societal structures that kind of feed this anxiety,
right.
like the constant pressure to achieve and be productive and always strive for more.
Absolutely. And I think that resonates even more strongly today than when Watts was writing, back in the mid 20th century.
Mm.
The pace of life is so much faster now. Technology is everywhere. And that pressure to always be on, it's just intensified.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's no wonder so many people feel overwhelmed and anxious these days.
So it's not just our own minds, but also the world we live in that's creating this anxiety. But then how do we find peace in all this chaos? Like we can't just opt out of society, can we?
Well, that's the real challenge, isn't it? Finding a balance between engaging with the world and cultivating our own inner peace.
Right.
And, Watts doesn't offer like a simple solution, but he does kind of point us in a direction.
Okay.
Remember the title, The Wisdom of Insecurity? He suggests that instead of fearing insecurity, we can learn to see it as a source of growth and creativity.
Okay, but how can insecurity be wise?
Yeah.
It feels so uncomfortable, so unsettling.
I think it helps to think of it like this. When we're clinging to certainty, to this illusion of control, we're essentially stuck in a box, limited by our own fears and preconceptions. But when we embrace insecurity, when we step outside of that box, that's when we open ourselves up to new possibilities, new ways of seeing the world, new ways of being.
So it's about loosening our grip, allowing ourselves to be surprised by life.
Mm.
But doesn't that feel kind of risky? What if we make mistakes? What if we fail?
Well, of course, there's always a risk of making mistakes.
Yeah.
But isn't that part of what makes life interesting? Think back to that music analogy.
Yeah.
A perfectly composed symphony can be technically impressive,
Right.
but it can also feel predictable, lifeless.
I see what you mean.
It's the improvisation, the unexpected notes, the moments where the musicians kind of go off script that create the magic, the energy, the real beauty.
It's like we're so afraid of hitting a wrong note
Yeah.
that we forget to just enjoy the music,
Right.
to let ourselves get lost in the rhythm.
Exactly.
But how do we actually do that? How do we shift from fearing insecurity to embracing it?
Well, it's a process, and it starts with awareness. Watts encourages us to become more mindful, to really pay attention to our thoughts and emotions, to observe those habitual patterns of reaction.
Mm.
The Chinese translation emphasizes this as well, inviting us to cultivate a deeper understanding of the present moment,
Yeah.
not just as a concept, but as a lived experience.
So becoming more present, more aware of what's happening within us and around us.
Right. And when we're truly present, we're not so caught up in those stories we tell ourselves about the past or the future.
Mhm.
We're less likely to get swept away by our anxieties and fears.
Okay.
We can see things more clearly with greater objectivity and compassion.
Yeah.
And from that place of clarity and presence, we can start to make choices that are more aligned with our values, with our deepest aspirations, even if those choices involve stepping into the unknown.
It sounds like a journey of self-discovery,
Mhm.
learning to trust ourselves and the unfolding of life.
It is.
And I guess that's where the real wisdom lies, right? Not in avoiding uncertainty, but in learning to navigate it with grace and courage.
Beautifully put. And remember, this is an ongoing process, not a destination.
Yeah.
It's about continually showing up for ourselves and for life with curiosity, with an open heart, and with a willingness to embrace the unknown, knowing that even in the midst of insecurity, there's a deeper wisdom unfolding, guiding us towards a more authentic and meaningful existence.
This has been a really insightful deep dive.
It has.
We've explored so much the roots of anxiety, the illusion of selves, the trap of time, and this surprising wisdom of insecurity, and I don't know about you, but I'm feeling like I have a whole new perspective on things.
Me too. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you, and I hope our listeners are walking away with some food for thought as well.
Definitely. And for you listening, what will you choose to embrace today? Even if it feels a little uncertain, remember this moment is all we truly have, and within it lies infinite possibility.
Follow the infinite within with Cecilia to explore profound insights on pantheism. Embrace the oneness of existence and unlock the mysteries within you.